we're going to talk why we are here today. So let's talk about mental illness. What we really want to talk about is why we need to have conversations about mental illness, and particularly to do with different kind of illnesses, because when we talk about mental health, a lot of the time people think about maybe anxiety or depression. And when we think about mental illness, people tend to think about different kind of illnesses, maybe some of the more severe ones. And that's really where the details for this particular guide came from. And it's why we wanted to share this information. And I have to apologize, I'm having an issue with my screen sharing here. Just one moment. Joys of tech, we've had a lovely morning of it. So let's start again. Okay, slideshow, please. The joys. Hopefully you'll be able to see it this time. So we'll try again. Okay. Now, hopefully you will all be able to see that. So who am I? Why am I talking to you? And hopefully what are we going to talk about today? So my name is Barbara Brennan. I'm the Programmes Leader of Sea Change. I have been an advocate for mental health and raising awareness about mental illnesses since 2009. And I am passionate about creating change in this area. We really want to talk about stigma and what that means, and discrimination, and how we can change that, how we can help people understand that stigma is a very normal thing that happens in our lives, but it shouldn't be. It should be something that we are all very aware of, and that we are aware of the kinds of ways that we might discriminate against somebody without even knowing about it. And that's really where this information is coming from. So when we're talking about who we are as part of the bigger picture, Sea Change is a programme of Shine, and Shine supports people affected by mental ill health. So if you want to find out more about the services that Shine provides, please go to shine.ie. You'll be able to find out about our regional services and our resource centres in Dublin, Cork and Waterford. So that's shine.ie. And we also support family members and supporters of people affected by mental ill health as well. Our sister programme, as you can see on the screen there, is Headline. So Headline supports the media. So there's two different aspects there to that programme. They look at media monitoring, and they also look at training and supporting journalists. So to find out more about Headline, you can go to headline.ie. For Sea Change then, hopefully some of you will be aware of who we are and what we do, but as I mentioned, we are the Stigma Reduction Partnership in Ireland, and we look at helping people understand the topic of stigma and how to counteract the discrimination that people experience. So to find out more about our different programmes, our Ambassador Programme, our Workplace Programme, and our biggest campaign, the Green Ribbon Campaign, you can go to seachange.ie. So before we kick off, what I would love to do is do a little poll. So Rachel, if you could throw the poll up there so people can engage with us, that would be great. So what I want to ask you is, how would you rate your understanding of the shame associated with the stigma that people living with mental illness can experience? So you have a very good understanding, a reasonable understanding, kind of understanding. I've heard the term and I understand it vaguely, or I have no understanding at all. So if you can, please get onto that poll there. We have 37, 38, 40 people. That's great. Thank you very much. We're going to stop the poll in one moment. So thank you to everybody who's participating there. And this is just for us to understand, when we're doing research like this, what kind of things people already know and the difficulties that they may have, so that we can help explain things in a different way, and so that we can use our research to help bridge these gaps. So it looks like we have nearly everybody on board. So Rachel, if you'd like to close that poll and share the results there. So we can see there that 25% of people have a very good understanding already, which is wonderful. We have 52% of people, so that's half of you on the call already, have a reasonable understanding. And then we have 21% of people who are saying kind of understanding, and 2% that have heard the term and understand it vaguely. And I'm glad to say that we have nobody on the call who has no understanding. So what I hope for everybody who is on the call today, whether it's that you have a good understanding, a reasonable understanding, or you only know about it vaguely, that today will help you understand the terms more, and more importantly, the impact that it has on other people. And this is really what we want to try and do with the research that we do, and with all of the project work that we do as well. So I'm going to go on and just explain what we are going to be talking about today. So we're going to explain about the difference between mental health difficulties and mental illnesses, because there is a difference. And it's about understanding that people can and do recover, regardless of if it's a difficulty or a mental illness. So we can all experience these, but we want to give you a better understanding around it and around some of the language as well. We want to talk about how mental health, stigma, shame, and discrimination impacts people negatively. So it's about the changes that happens in people's lives because of the stigma. So it's not because of the illness, it's because of the stigma and what they experience. And really in that area, we really want to see about what it's like when we experience mental illness, what it's like to live with that, and what it's like to live with the shame experienced alongside that illness. And then more importantly, and this is probably why we're actually all here on this call, is to find out what we can do to help end that mental health stigma, to help break that discrimination down, and to really make changes. So what I'm going to do now, I believe that Minister has joined us, and I would like to sincerely apologise because I know that you've had tech issues getting in as well. So I would very much like to introduce Minister for Mental Health, Mary Butler.
Good morning, Barbara. Good morning to everyone. Yes, the gremlins were in Leinster House today, I have to say. My screen here. Yeah, it has been a hectic 30 minutes trying to get online, but we're here now, and that's all that matters. So look, it's my honour and privilege to speak today at today's launch. Let's talk about mental illness guide. And I want to thank Barbara and all the team at Sea Change for their kind invitation and for organising today's event. But Barbara, I also want to thank you and all the team for your tireless work. And, you know, I'm really delighted with the focus today on how you spoke already about the difference between mental health difficulties and mental illness, because that is something that has been really, really conflated during COVID. We listen to people on the news, we listen to people on media, the pub was closed, so their mental health was affected. And I used to nearly be screaming at the television saying, your mental health is not affected, your emotional well-being is affected, it's having an effect on your everyday life. But when I think of mental illness, I think of all the people in services, I think of all the people in the approved centres, I think of the people who are today in our day hospitals, in our mental health daycare centres, and those who are receiving supports in the community. And I really, really welcome this positive focus and this explanation for so many people. So thank you for that. It's a brilliant opportunity for us to learn more about the different types of mental illness and shine a light on how stigma, shame, and discrimination are still a significant challenge for people living with mental health difficulties. Everyone has mental health and mental health needs. Anyone can experience mental health challenges at any times during their life. And I would say that there's not a family in Ireland who hasn't been directly or indirectly affected by a family member who would have a mental illness. But it is our collective responsibility to ensure that everyone feels supported and listened to. They share their experiences of mental health difficulties. For a long time in Ireland, people experiencing mental health difficulties were shamed and they were stigmatised. And we have seen great progress in recent years, and especially with the Sea Change Green Ribbon. And I wear it proudly every opportunity I get. And I just think the phenomenal work, Barbara and the team, Sea Change, what you have done in taking the stigma out of mental health, it's just, you just couldn't quantify it. So again, thank you for that. We have seen progress with more and more people talking openly about their mental health needs and getting support from family, friends, and mental health services. The COVID-19 pandemic in particular caused significant stress, anxiety, worry, fear for many people throughout the world, both from the disease itself and from impacts such as increased social isolation, disruption to daily life, and uncertainty about employment and financial security. All of this led to greater public awareness and dialogue around our mental health needs. However, as the Let's Talk About Mental Illness guide highlights, stigma and shame remain hugely prevalent in the lives of many people with mental health difficulties in Ireland. While we are more open to having conversations about mental health difficulties like anxiety and depression, there remains a lot of stigma around mental health diagnoses such as bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, psychosis, and these conditions and many others are often misunderstood, they're highly stigmatized, and they're left out of mainstream conversations. And I stress continuously that the stigma historically associated with mental health can be the most damaging factor in the life of anyone who experiences mental health difficulties. We have made great strides over recent years to change attitudes towards mental health, and this progress must be maintained going forward. And I think we can do that because we're all singing off the same hymn sheet. The government and I, with our HSE and its partners, are committed to helping end mental health stigma, shame and discrimination. This is reflected by our funding of organisations like Sea Change that shine a light on the stigma and shame often associated with mental health. Today's launch is a crucial step forward towards achieving our shared objectives of ensuring everyone with mental health difficulties receives the appropriate care and support. Sharing the vision, our national mental health policy is underpinned by key outcomes, including reducing stigma and discrimination arising through improved community-wide understanding of mental health difficulties. And I also think by putting the service user front and centre. The policy recognises that mental health stigma, self-stigmatisation, prejudice, discrimination are some of the main reasons why people experiencing mental health difficulties do not seek help. Reducing the stigma and discrimination associated with mental health difficulties is central to improved well-being at societal level. Similar to the approach delivered by organisations such as Sea Change, we must encourage a culture where people experiencing mental health difficulties do not hesitate to seek help. They establish an early intervention mechanism of delivering that help and promote at every opportunity the concepts of positive mental health and recovery. And it does worry me, and often we're all very conscious of suicide in our community, suicide figures. And it is very painful for me as minister when somebody takes that decision to end their own life, the effect it has on their families, and especially when you hear afterwards, no, they didn't engage with services, they didn't want to engage, they didn't understand, they weren't signposted properly. And every day that we have this conversation and every day that we get that message out there, it's really, really important. The Let's Talk About Mental Illness guide very much embodies the ethos and the objectives of Sharing the Vision, which has a strong focus on positive mental health promotion, early intervention and recovery. There's absolutely no shame in experiencing mental difficulties and in asking for support. It takes immense courage to seek help from mental health services when experiencing mental health difficulties. It is our responsibility as service providers to ensure we are there to support people when they need our services most. And that may be the very first initial contact a person makes, and to make sure that they are signposted correctly and that they get the support they need. The government's clear commitment to enhancing mental health services is shown by significant increase in funding in recent years. I am pleased to have secured an unprecedented level of funding, 1.149 billion for mental health in this year's budget, which was an increase of 47 million from 2021, and it includes ring-fence funding for a number of recovery-focused initiatives and supports. But that's never enough, and we're already turning our mind towards next year's budget. We're already starting to look at facts and figures in relation to that. There was a further €10 million once-off additional funding announced on budget day, and that has been allocated to improve the experience of individuals accessing mental health services. I was very keen to focus on those who are living in our approved centres, those who live in the 1,200 community homes throughout the country. I really felt that it was an area that didn't always get a focus. And I'm really pleased as well to say that those 1,200 homes throughout the community, that when I bring forward the mental health legislation towards the end of the year, the Mental Health Commission will have access under the new legislation to enter each and every one of those homes. And I think it's only correct and right that that happens. As part of our efforts to reduce stigma and shame surrounding mental health, the government, in collaboration with the HSE and its partner agencies, is challenging attitudes that mental health needs should be kept hidden and not discussed by providing greater mental health services within our local communities. That day is gone. The day of hiding away is over. Significant progress has been on those over recent years on reducing stigma, promoting resilience and aiding recovery through our community mental health services. The first community out of hours cafe in Ireland officially opened last year in Galway, and more are planned as we implement sharing the vision. I've always been particularly conscious of the need to improve awareness and signposting around the wide range of youth mental health supports that are available nationally. In this context, the HSE has enhanced yourmentalhealth.ie, and I am sure there was a greater awareness in schools on mental health supports during COVID. There are a range of walk-in youth mental health organisations at local level, as you know, such as Jigsaw, that provide face-to-face supports with the new online digital supports also. Notwithstanding some achievements, there is of course scope to make further improvements, and much more work is yet to be done. It is of the utmost importance that people can access timely and high quality mental health services, especially where they live. This postcode lottery is something I've spoke about relentlessly for the last 2 years, which is absolutely crucial, and it's absolutely critical that regardless of where you live in the country, that you have access to the right care in the right place at the right time. And I'm fully committed to developing this in collaboration with the HSE moving forward. And I suppose last week I was delighted to visit Clunvera in Sandyford, where we have a new ADHD team for adults. So by the end of this year, we'll have 6 ADHD teams across the country. By the end of this year, we'll have 9 eating disorder teams across the country. I do have to do it incrementally, build on it year by year. But at the same time, we are making progress. It is slow, but the progress is there. And most importantly, the funding is there. I can provide the funding to build on this year on year. I would like to give a special mention to the people with lived experience and their families who have contributed to the development of this guide and who work as ambassadors for See Change. Speaking about your experience of mental health difficulties and of the services can be very challenging. I greatly admire your willingness to share your experiences. Your contribution provides a measurable benefit to policymakers and service providers, which ultimately benefit other service users. It is absolutely vital that people who use our services are at the heart of the design, development and delivery of the systems we build to serve them. And that's why I was delighted last week to attend the first meeting under the National Implementation and Monitoring Committee of a committee put together of people with lived experience, of people who provide peer support. And as I as Minister try to deliver or share in the vision, working with all the partners across the whole country, the voice of the service user, the voice of those with lived experience, the voice of those with peer support, hugely, hugely important. Every person, whether you have been personally touched by mental health problems or not, has the power to help stop the stigma and discrimination of mental health problems. Both myself and the government as a whole are firmly committed to playing our part in reducing the stigma surrounding mental health. And once again, I want to compliment Barbara and all the team at See Change. The work you have done is invaluable. You're just a beacon of light, and every time I put on the green ribbon, I wear it proudly, because I really feel that once that green ribbon is in place, everyone knows what it means, everyone understands what it means. And if one more person speaks about their mental health today, if one more person doesn't feel stigmatized, it's a job well done. So listen, I want to wish you all the best with the rest of your launch today, and thank you very much for including me once again.
Thank you so much, Minister. And it is really wonderful to hear about the work that is being done, because I know for so many people, when we have these conversations about mental health, I know there are a lot of people who come to these conversations with massive frustration and disappointment and worry and all of those things. So to hear the commitment that is there, and to know that while it is slow, that things are happening and are changing, it's fantastic. I know that China are massively supportive and very proud to be part of the National Monitoring Committee because of those voices of lived experience. And it's something that when we think about those human stories, it is right that we're all having those conversations at that kind of level. Some of the points that you touched first off, I love when you started talking about emotional well-being, and that there's a very big difference between our emotional well-being and needing a service. And I think that's one of the things that when people start understanding mental health in that perspective, that's when we can start saying, well, yes, I'm not feeling well, but is there something I can do myself to try and move my mood along? Or yes, I'm not feeling well, and the things I'm doing are not helping and I need help. So now where do I go? So that was the other point that you made about signposting, and you mentioned it a number of times. And I was delighted when you did actually signpost to your mentalhealth.ie and Jigsaw. And there are a huge number of services provided like Shine and Jigsaw and Aware. But going to your mentalhealth.ie, for those of you on the call who haven't used that service, it is so wonderful to see that it is being updated and that there is more there. You mentioned stress, anxiety, fear, isolation, and disruption. Those are very normal things that happen. And particularly with COVID-19, it has really impacted people. But when we think about mental illness, the impact is disproportionate because people who are experiencing mental illnesses, and as you rightly mentioned, may not be seeking that support for fear of being discriminated against or treated differently or judged, or maybe not even getting the support that they are seeking. That those stresses and difficulties are multiplied across. When you talked about the progress that is there, that people are starting to understand their mental health needs, that they are starting to ask, but most importantly, that they're talking to their families, to their friends, to their colleagues, that those conversations are happening. We see it and we have been supporting it massively for the last 10 years, but in the last 3 years particularly, we have seen a huge shift in that direction. We're delighted to see that the government and that your team are starting to listen and starting to make change and implement some of these things, because you mentioned that stigma is a damaging factor, and it most certainly is. And for a lot of the people that have a lived experience that we have spoken to, it's most often not the illness itself, but actually the stigma that they find the most difficult to deal with. And I know that's something that you have worked very hard with us and in a lot of the work that you do to help change those conversations. One of the things that I thought was really good that you highlighted as well, that a lot of people who are supporting others still don't understand, but they also don't know where to support or how to signpost for the people that they love. So again, getting that information out, and I suppose that's where we were coming from with this particular piece of research, to try and help people on both sides. So somebody who's experiencing that maybe for the first time, and they're understanding something has changed, something is different, I don't know what this is, I'm afraid, and I don't know where to go. Or we have that family member or the person that is caring for this person to say, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to go. So again, that signposting is absolutely fantastic, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing in that area. So we wish you every good luck and success in continuing to keep going with that work and keep supporting it. And thank you again for your support for us and for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I have to leave now. I'm due in the Shannon at 10:30. Okay, thank you very much and the best.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
So that was Minister Mary Butler, and she impacts me hugely when she talks in such a human way about the things that affect us all. And particularly when we talk about these things, they can be very difficult because we don't know how. I think with COVID-19, we have started talking about being lonely a little bit more, about being stressed a little bit more, about understanding anxiety a little bit better, even talking about low moods or not even knowing what that is. We are starting to have those conversations, and it's so vital that we do have them. But there is still a big gap between those conversations and the conversations about feeling mentally unwell, needing support, or receiving a diagnosis of a mental illness and starting that journey. So that's really what we're here today to talk about, to understand the gap that is still there between the language that we use, the understanding that we have, the education that we need, and the piece of how we can do that and remove stigma as we're going. So what I'm going to do now is share our slides and talk to you a little bit about research that we did and the guide that we're launching. So if you're not aware of the guide yet, it is now available for download for free on our website, that's cchange.ie/publications. The link will be in the chat in a moment. And I'm delighted to say that we will be printing hard copies. They are currently with our printer, and we are due to receive them on Friday. Friday. So if you would like to order hard copies of this particular guide, you can drop an email to commsofficer@seechange.ie, and again, that email will be in the chat shortly for you. So let's have a look and see what our research says. So when we're talking about mental health difficulty and mental illness, I think Minister Butler really spoke very eloquently around that and the difference between our emotional well-being. So when we're talking about mental health difficulty, we all have mental health. So it is possible that at any point in time, we can have a dip in our mental health. Having a dip in our mental health and having a mental health difficulty doesn't necessarily mean that we have a mental illness, and there can be a big difference between those. So the kind of things that we see as defining factors are the length of time that it is you're experiencing it, the impact that it has on your life, and there are sometimes different things that are needed to improve your life if you have a mental illness that maybe the mental health difficulty might not need. So that would be the intervention of the supports and services then coming in. So when we're thinking about what does that look like, and then what does a mental illness look like, and what's the difference? And when we're talking about people recovering as well, what does that look like? Because it's a very new concept for a lot of people that if we're still only learning about mental health difficulties and we're still only learning about mental illness, we still have this idea that once you have it, then that's you for life. And some people, they kind of sign themselves off, or they write themselves off, or we're writing other people off. That's that stigma piece coming in. When actually there are many, many people that we know, that we love, that we work with, that we're friends with, who have mental health difficulties and or mental illnesses, and they function and they have very regular lives because they manage their illness. It's the same as any physical illness. If we don't manage it, if we don't look after our bodies, of course, we're going to see more negative outcomes. Whereas if we do the maintenance plans and we do the things that we know are going to help, we use the services that are provided by our medical professionals, and we do the things that our body needs, we can stay well, we can stay healthy, and we can manage those illnesses. It is exactly the same for our mental health. So when we're thinking about that, so mental health difficulty, it's short or long term. And the reason that I say short or long term is usually it's to do with an external factor that's happening. And the thing is that if you don't, it can become a more long-term thing. So usually a mental health difficulty is a more short-lived thing, but it can go into a longer period of time depending on the external thing that's causing the issue and also how you manage it. So as I mentioned, it's not necessarily to do with a diagnosis, whereas when we're talking about mental illness, the diagnosis is required. So this is where you would be diagnosed by a medical professional. And it really is looking at your mood, your behavior, about all of the way that you think and feel, and the negative impact that it has on your life, because that's the biggest piece about it. Where usually when we see people struggling with a mental health difficulty, that's a piece where we are still functioning, we're still managing, we're still doing the normal things. And quite often mental illness, when it's at a diagnosable stage, a lot of people experiencing that, and not everybody, but a lot of people experiencing it at that rate may not be able to function in their normal capacity until they start making changes and getting that support. When we're thinking about mental illness then, the kind of illnesses that we're talking about in this more severe and long-term kind of way, we're thinking about schizophrenia, maybe OCD, bipolar disorder. There are a number of different eating disorders that would fall into that, personality disorders. There are a number of disorders that might also include psychosis, or could be psychosis on its own. So there is a huge array of different experiences. And the other thing to know as well is that even though a mental illness may have particular characteristics, as we are all unique as human individuals, our experience of these particular things will also be unique. So just because we might know something about a particular illness doesn't mean that another person is going to experience that exact same thing in the exact same way, or that the treatment and support that they need is exactly the same as what you might have needed, or somebody that you know might have needed, or something that you've read. So it's really important, and this is going back to the point that the Minister made about that personal lived experience, that we always engage with the person, whether it's that we are providing care or a service for somebody who's experiencing a mental health difficulty, whether it's that we're friends with them, we work with them, or that they're our partners or our children. These are the things that we need to bear in mind, that just because we've read something doesn't necessarily make it fit this particular person. So it's always about including the person's voice and their own experiencing and asking, what's that like for you? We can never know what it's like for somebody else. And then thinking about the kinds of things that we found in our research. 75% of people that we surveyed didn't even know what the term severe and enduring mental illness is. So one of the things that you will find when you start looking at this guide is the term severe and enduring mental illness is used an awful lot in the medical profession. However, it isn't a diagnostic term. So what it is it is two different things coming together. It's saying that it's severe, so that's the level of impact that it has on a person's life. And it's enduring, which means it's a long term. So it's not something that's going to happen over a couple of weeks. It could be months or years or even decades. So when we're thinking about that enduring piece, it's that really long term effect on a person's life. And the severity is the piece there about the impact on it. So only 1/3 of people that we surveyed actually linked that term to mental illness. So that shows that there's a difficulty even in understanding if somebody has a severe and complex and long-term mental health problem. The people aren't even aware of the language that's being used to describe that. So if somebody is to say, well, I have a severe and enduring illness or a severe and enduring mental illness, already people are on the back foot because they don't understand what that means. And only 16% of those people that we surveyed actually identified as having a severe and enduring or long-term and complex mental illness. So you can see already, before we start thinking about anything to do with the illnesses themselves, when we're looking at the severity and the length of time that people experience them, people already don't really understand about that piece in itself. And that's one of the things that we need to start understanding. So again, thinking about the voices of lived experience that Minister Butler mentioned, we have an amazing group of people called ambassadors, and they are people with lived experience who have been trained by Sea Change to share their story responsibly. And Kathy Cha is one of those ambassadors. And as you can see on the screen there, having a severe and enduring mental illness is not a choice. Just as someone suffering from an enduring physical illness did not choose their illness, I did not choose to have my condition. They deserve the same care, compassion, respect, and understanding through all levels of society as somebody who is suffering from a complex physical illness. I am not responsible for my condition. With the right help and support, I can be empowered to take responsibility for my recovery. These are the things that we need to know about, because for many years, when we found out that we had a mental illness, or we found out that somebody else had a mental illness, quite often we were thinking the worst for that person. We were thinking that it probably wouldn't work again, or we were thinking about all of the services that they were going to go through and all the difficulties they were going to have. The fact that these services are changing, the fact that they're coming into the communities instead of being separate, the fact that we are having these conversations in our workplaces, in our communities, in our families, things are changing. And as long as we keep pushing for that change and we keep showing up and being part of it, even when we don't know what we don't know, this is how we can make change. When we start listening to people like Kathy and all of our ambassadors and understanding a little bit about the difficulties that they face, because this is the thing about stigma. For a lot of people who experience a mental illness, they're managing their illness. And what happens is they have the regular life, then they have their illness on top of that, and that's where an additional layer of difficulty is. But then they have the stigma on top of that again, and the discrimination that comes with it. So these top layers are what really, really squeezes the illness and makes it really difficult. And as Minister Butler mentioned, it's that gap where people are experiencing that fear, that discrimination, or even predicting that they are going to be discriminated against. They may have experienced stigma before, and so now they're perpetuating it by saying, I might be treated differently, so I'm not going to engage with this person or this group. So that's that self-stigma then kicking in and starting to prevent somebody from accessing support, from accessing help. And that's really why we need to have these conversations. And it's why Sea Change exists, because Shine has been around since the 70s, and they started looking at the barriers that people have to accessing support and why people are not having more open conversations about mental health. And they understood that stigma was a huge problem. And as Minister Butler said, we have come a long way. We are really changing and we are making a difference. change is slow and societal change is even slower. So I do see a huge difference in the last 10 years, and the fact that we're all on this call today to talk about mental illness, not just mental health, is phenomenal. The more that we can do this, the better that we will get, and the closer we will come to helping people like Kathy and all of our other ambassadors do not feel any kind of shame associated with the illness that they are experiencing, because there is no shame in having a mental health difficulty. So when we're thinking about what that looks like and what is mental health stigma, what is the shame associated with it, and what does this discrimination look like, that's when we can start putting it into real context and understanding where it is. So when you think about stigma in the first place, we break it down into two different places. We say that there's public stigma and there's self-stigma. And for each of those, there is overt stigma and subtle stigma. So the overt is the intentional, on purpose, knowing very well that it's being done. Whereas the subtle is the maybe not even being aware that it's being done or that you are the one doing it. That we might treat somebody in a slightly different way because we're not sure how to handle it, or we're not sure what to say. Or for example, in a workplace, if somebody has been experiencing a mental health difficulty and maybe their project leader or their manager decides, you know, maybe Barbara's been struggling a little bit with her mental health lately, or she's just back from leave, maybe I should lighten her load just to help her. The thing is, if that conversation isn't done in consultation with me, it can be seen as discrimination. And that's where sometimes when we're trying to help, if we're doing it to the person, if we're not having the discussion with the person, if their voice is not included, then there may be some element of discrimination. And that's the bit that we need to start understanding. That I think for most of us, we are fearful of saying the wrong thing. For most of us, we are kind and we want to help. And for most of us, we are afraid that if we do something, it's going to have a negative impact on the person. The problem is that for most of us, we are so afraid of those things that we don't ask those questions. We don't have that conversation, and we don't go to the person and say, what is that like for you? And how can I help you change this? So the public stigma, there are three aspects. There is prejudice, there is stereotyping, and there is discrimination. And the self-stigma then is where we take those pieces and we put it into our own lives and we do it to ourselves. So it really is understanding that piece around shame and guilt and the impact and the loading that happens. So the difference between shame and guilt is that shame eats at your core. It says that you are bad. Whereas the guilt is that piece that I feel it. So it's very, very different from an identification piece that as a character, as a person, I am bad. And that's the bit that it associates with mental illnesses, that a lot of people who experience mental health difficulties feel that they are bad, that they are wrong. That is what we need to change, because it isn't right that that happens, and there is no need. And surely when we see that people with physical illnesses get help, get support, and get better, that's exactly what we need to do. And when we can see there that that idea that somebody feels shame, you can understand how they might be more angry, it might increase their sadness, or it might make them feel embarrassed, which might lead to more isolating themselves. Thinking about some of the language around those and what it looks like, or what a person might be thinking if they were feeling shameful, or if they were feeling that piece of guilt and that heavy weight of the shame. I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I am ashamed. I'm ashamed of who I am. I'm not worthy of treatment, I'm not sick enough. There's somebody worse than me who could do with this treatment more than me. I'm not strong enough, I'm not accomplished enough. When we say those things and we hear how heavy they are, and now we're adding them to those layers of illness and the regular stresses of life, this is why we need to change these and why we need to get rid of this part. We experience stigma in all walks of life. So while we're saying that stigma is discriminatory, the thing is that stigma loves everybody. It doesn't matter where you live, it doesn't matter what age you are, what colour you are, where you work or if you don't. It doesn't matter who you love. It doesn't matter where you are in society, stigma wants to be part of your life. And that's why we have to work twice as hard, because stigma shows up even when we don't invite it, because we have to actively uninvite it. So thinking about our communities, we are thinking about our community, our friends, our families, in school, in workplaces, even online. So all of these places is where stigma does show up if we don't actively do something to change it. So looking at some of those stats, 50% of people said that they wouldn't want to work with somebody with a severe and enduring mental illness. And I want to remind you that earlier, only 16% of people said that they knew what severe and enduring meant. So you have a whole pile of people now saying, I don't know what that is, but I don't want to work with that person. And then we've got 72% of people saying that they don't want to live with somebody. So again, a lot of people not understanding what it is, not knowing anything about it, and making these prejudiced decisions. I am pre-deciding this thing about you before I have any information. And that is what stigma means. Supporting somebody with a mental illness, all of this information is in the guide, by the way. I'm delighted to say that some of the graphics from this have been taken from the book. So if I'm going through this quite quickly, it's because I want to get to our next fantastic speaker, Blessing, one of our ambassadors. But before I do, I just want to flag some of the things that if you are here thinking about somebody in your life that has a mental illness and some of the things that you can do. Educating yourself, so finding out a little bit more and being involved. Sometimes that education, by the way, can come from the person. So we can have that conversation. What's that like for you? Tell me more about that. I don't understand. What have you learned so far? Being realistic can be a really difficult one when we're supporting somebody else because we want to help so much. We want to fix them. We want to give them all the advice and all the answers. And we just want to make them better. We need to know that sometimes that isn't the way and that they have to find their own journey and that we can be there to support them, but we can't do it for them. The support groups that we mentioned, like the Shine Family Services, really important that we engage with support for ourselves when we are supporting somebody else. So again, the yourmentalhealth.ie and the shine.ie websites are really good places to start. Being prepared. So if you think that there may be a crisis coming down the line, now is the time to prepare to find out where would I go if I needed support and what would that support look like. And lastly, looking after yourself because you can't pour from an empty cup. There are so many different tips and tools and well-being things that you can find. And Shine is also currently running a whole pile of well-being programs for people and for supporters. So again, I would flag the services there to find out what they can do. So you heard me say earlier on that there is no shame in having a mental health difficulty. One of our ambassadors, Becky, says the only thing more exhausting than having a mental illness is pretending like you don't. So thinking about that, the kind of things and the kind of words that we have been that have been shared to us from our ambassadors is shame, lack of knowledge that something is wrong with you, that your life is disrupted, that you're misunderstood, and that you're misrepresented, or that people in the group that experience the same illness as you are misunderstood and misrepresented. This is why we have to have these conversations and why we have to change. So I am absolutely delighted to welcome Blessing Dada. Blessing is one of our ambassadors and speaks so eloquently about her experience of being a change maker and sharing her story. So Blessing, I would love to welcome you to share your words with our group today.
Hello, I think you can see me. Oh, there we go. So hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me to speak on this panel. Yeah, it's just amazing to just have this opportunity to be here because, you know, for those who may not know, it is Mental Health Awareness Month. So usually around May, people, you know, talk about their experiences of mental health struggles or mental illnesses. And a lot of the conversation would be surrounding the topics of mostly anxiety and depression. But also with the Mental Health Awareness Month, there's usually a theme that comes with it each year. And this year the theme is loneliness. So as a person who has mental illnesses, I speak on social media about my own experiences with living with mental illnesses and then being an ambassador with Sea Change and taking part in work such as speaking on panels, writing content for Sea Change, and so forth. Sorry, I'm kind of a bit nervous now. So yeah, with the theme of loneliness, I suppose I mentioned that because usually when it's Mental Health Awareness Month, anxiety and depression are very often talked about, but people sometimes forget that there's more to mental illnesses than just anxiety and depression, and that there's other mental illnesses that are not spoken as much and have a much higher stigma and shame that comes with it, such as, you know, OCD, PTSD, schizophrenia, and bipolar, and so much more. So I've talked about it only once or twice on social media just due to the stigma that comes with it, and I have like coworkers that follow me on it, so I try to not feel shame about that because I have to protect myself at the same time, but it's unfortunate that's that way. But a lot of people would not know that one of my mental illnesses that I live with is OCD. OCD is obsessive compulsion disorder, and it's something that's really difficult to live with because there's just so many different types of misconceptions that people have, and that is especially portrayed in the media, which is why I really enjoy the work that Headline does. Headline is working with See Change and Shine, and they do work in making sure that mental illnesses and suicide is reported in the media accurately. So when it comes to living with OCD, one of the things that I do want to highlight is that it's normal that people have intrusive thoughts. Everyone has intrusive thoughts, but I suppose with OCD, it's kind of the compulsion that comes behind it, and the everyday ways that it impacts your life, and especially being autistic as well. And it makes it twice as hard because being autistic, I like things to stay the same, and then with having OCD, the two of them can kind of be very similar in ways. Sorry, I just have like my notes to me just in case, because brain fog is bad today. But definitely one of the ways OCD impacts my life is insomnia. So there's just certain things that I feel like I have to do that would help me feel that things will be okay in life, and it's just very time consuming and something that I've always struggled with my whole life, because I could not be able to relate with people who were able to have lie-ins. And just growing up, I would struggle with, you know, not being able to sleep properly, and then just realizing that like at night time I just have so many different things going on in my mind that's always on the go. And usually when people hear OCD, they think of things like cleanness or tidiness, which is not the case at all. There's many different types of OCD. There is religious OCD, which is one of the traits I struggle with mostly. And there is, I forget the other ones, but religious OCD would be the biggest one that I would struggle with, just with growing up and being raised as a Christian. But yes, and definitely the second one is people think it's like tidiness or clean, or being clean and tidy. And it comes to a surprise when people who live with OCD and know the person, and they see that maybe their place is messy, and you know, in their head they're like, you can't have OCD, your house is messy, this, that. And it's just all down to the way media and movies portray these type of illnesses. So yeah, definitely it's loneliness in living with OCD, because it's just always having to try and combat, try not to give into the intrusive thoughts. And sometimes a lot of the experiences that I go through, it comes with accident, self-harm, and just other ways that it just impacts my life. I think this month I've only left my house 4 or 5 times because it's so time consuming that one of the ways that I do try to help myself is, you know, taking pictures of making sure that, like, reassuring myself that I have locked the door or I have turned off the oven, and journaling, and just also receiving therapy and being on antidepressants. But yeah, one of the ways that I do want to encourage people and to educate people on is the importance of language. So, you know, especially with coming up to summer, I do hear often people say things like, oh, the weather is so bipolar, and it's really important for people to know that mental illnesses aren't adjectives. These are really, they can be detrimental to hear that from someone who has a lived experience. Another thing I can think of is people saying, you know, I'm so OCD, and they just don't understand, like, how much it just affects your life, to the point where, you know, at the moment I've failed college 4 times because it takes me 4 hours to get out of bed, because I have to do so many different things, and that's just so much to even, you know, explain on this chat, and that just takes up so much of your time. And it's very energy draining as well, because your mind is just always on the go. And I just really want people to challenge the stigma, and the language when it comes to mental health and mental illnesses, and to kind of go beyond just anxiety and depression, because I feel personally that the conversation is amazing, and people are becoming more open with talking about mental illnesses. But if it's just that if we just continue to talk about only anxiety and depression, we're just leaving out a much bigger aspect of the conversation as well, that is just very highly stigmatized. So yeah, definitely, when it comes to education and getting support, there's many stories on the Sea Change website where other ambassadors will share their stories. And definitely, I know that it's not just me living with OCD. It's just kind of the loneliness in people not being aware as much, and just really encouraging people to follow those who have the lived experiences to be educated in this topic. So yeah, if anyone have any other questions, I don't mind answering them. But thank you so much for listening, and just for being patient with my nervousness, because this is only the second time in my whole life that I've talked about it openly.
And it's such a brave thing to do. And I hope that you will be able to take a moment and look at some of the comments coming in, because you're helping so many people with your story. And I think this is the thing, that by normalizing these conversations, it does help people. And I love the way you so eloquently said that mental illnesses aren't adjectives. And also the fact that different kinds of illnesses have different kinds. So even within OCD, that there are many different kinds, and the misconceptions around that. So we would invite everybody to learn more about different illnesses, and particularly through our guide. To find out a little bit more about Blessing's story, she has done so much with us. So there are many articles on our website, and you were part of our podcast as well. So you've done so much work with us, and that's just through the work on Sea Change. So thank you again for trying to break down that shame, break down that stigma, and for sharing your own story. You are making such a huge difference to so many people. So to everybody who is still on the call, I want to say thank you very much. I'm very conscious of your time, so I want to just share our screen for the last time, and just share the different resources that we have for you. So you can see on the website there, it's seachange.ie publications. We have a number of guides, as I mentioned earlier on, including the Living with COVID-19 guide, which does look at some supports around how to manage if you are struggling with anxiety. So lastly, what I'd like to do is run that poll again. So Rachel, if you wouldn't mind just throwing up the poll, and if you would answer the same question that you did earlier on. So now that we've had this discussion, Do you have a different understanding than when we started around the stigma that people experience with a mental health or mental illness, and the shame that goes with that as well? So thank you very much for everybody for answering. And I will ask, if you wouldn't mind, we are going to drop a link in the chat for feedback. If you could please give us some feedback on the event, on what helped, what we could have done differently, or if there was something that was missing, and it help us so that when we are running events that we are talking about the topics that are important to you and sharing the information that you need. So Rachel, if you'd like to stop that poll, I know that people are still participating, but just looking at time. So far it shows that 71% of you now have a good understanding, and that 29% have a reasonable understanding, and we have nothing in the bottom. So it means that everybody has learned something from this session today. So as I mentioned, we have the feedback form. So if you wouldn't mind taking a look in the chat, in the function there, and clicking on that link, it is an online form. We will also send it out in the email following this with all of the links as well. So lastly, just to say thank you so very much. I'm absolutely delighted to have had this conversation, and for so many of you to have come on to listen. So now I would really hope that you would drop us an email and order your free copy of the new Let's Talk About Mental Illness guide. We'll need your postal address, your air code, and your name and how many copies you like, and you can send that to commsofficer@seachange.ie, and you can download it directly from the Sea Change website on the publications section. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Minister Butler for her words of encouragement and blessing, and to all of the ambassadors who engage with us and are so very brave in sharing their story. We can't do our work without you. So thank you very much. I hope you all have a good afternoon ahead, and we really look forward to engaging you more this year talking about mental health and mental illness.